I'm Rebecca Kern, Bloomberg Government's technology reporter, and I'm speaking this morning with Brandon Wales, the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA. We'll be talking about CISA's role in responding to the recent uptick in cyber and ransomware attacks on the public and private sectors. We'll also discuss actions business leaders can take to make themselves more cyber secure and the launch of the new public-private partnership by CISA this summer. To start off, can you share some of the broad lessons learned from the SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline attacks in the past year, and how CISA has helped the private sector respond and recover?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca, and really appreciate you and Bloomberg for bringing us together. That's obviously covering a lot of ground. There were a lot of things that we've learned from those incidents, as well as many other cyber incidents that CISA has been responding to over the past year. But I want to highlight just two of the key ones for us. The first is the lack of visibility. What we saw, particularly in the SolarWinds example, was that CISA did not have sufficient level of visibility in terms of what was happening inside agency networks to be able to spot that malicious activity earlier in that incident. And that is a legacy problem that has grown over time as networks have changed, as the rise in encrypted traffic. And so we've had to begin to adjust our efforts and some of our programs to begin to tackle that problem using new funding from Congress, deploying some new tools and capabilities, and getting new strategic direction from the president when he signed his executive order on cybersecurity back in May. The second lesson learned that I would highlight is what we can shorthand as bad practices. I think what we have seen in too many incidents is that adversaries are able to exploit networks because of certain poor practices that appear again and again. So that could be using out-of-date software that's no longer supported and patched by the vendor. It could be lack of multi-factor authentication on remote access to critical systems, which we saw in the Colonial example. And so CISA has been on an effort to try to convince people and highlight the bad practices that are out there to begin to get them to change their ways. And so it's not just about promoting good practices, but it's about remediating those bad practices. Because even if you've got good practices in a number of parts of your network, if you've got a couple of areas that have weak points, that's where the adversaries are likely to go. That's how they're going to, that's what they're going to use to get inside of your systems.
Right. Yeah. And, if unfortunately a company is experiencing a ransomware attack, what does CISA recommend these companies do right away?
Sure. So, the first point I would raise is, the first time you think about ransomware should not be after you've been hit. By that point, it's too late. You're already going to have a really bad day. Or many days or many weeks. And so you need to begin to start thinking about how do you get ready for a ransomware incident long before it actually hits you. I recommend that every company go look at our ransomware guide. We released it with the multi-state ISAC last summer, and it provides information on how to prepare, and it also provides a checklist on what to do if there's an incident. If you are hit, the first thing you should do is protect your system. If you could take the infected computers offline so that the ransomware may not further spread, you should do that. And third, you should go and get help. And that means notifying the government. Bring your incident to CISA, to the FBI. If there are things that we can do to assist, we will. There are things the FBI, from a law enforcement perspective, wants so that they can potentially go after the bad guys who perpetrated the attack. And then finally, when you're getting help, if your company is not capable of responding to a cyber incident because you've not done it before, we'd strongly recommend that you bring in an outside company to assist you. There are a lot of cybersecurity vendors out there. Find a reputable one who has experience in dealing with ransomware incidents, and they can help you remediate your incident on your network and get you back up and running as soon as possible.
So recommending notifying the government, CISA and FBI too? Where in the process does a company do that?
We would say you should do it early on. The sooner that we're brought in, the more that we can do. And it's also not just about the individual company, particularly from the CISA perspective. We want to know about these cyber incidents that are happening so that we can protect other potential victims. What we often see is that a ransomware operator will deploy malware on a number of networks at the same time using automated tools. And then they'll go into companies one by one, activate that ransomware, and begin to engage with that company on a potential ransom. In that time, there are other potential victims out there who have the opportunity to stop their network from being compromised. And so the sooner information is reported to us, we understand the nature of what happened, the sooner we can get that information out to other people who are potentially victims and protect their systems. And I think that is so essential to protecting this broader cyber ecosystem out there. And so today, your company may be hit, but tomorrow you're going to want CISA to know because we could be protecting you from the next malicious incident.
Right, and in that line of thought, the recent uptick in cyber attacks has spurred Congress to introduce several bills that would require critical infrastructure operators to report cyber attacks to CISA. What are your initial thoughts on these bills, and do you support mandatory reporting?
Yeah, CISA has now been on record going back a number of months that we're supportive of mandatory incident reporting. We have 4 principles that we want to see embodied in whatever legislation is passed. First, that reporting come to CISA so that we can help protect that ecosystem that I just discussed. Second, that reporting be timely, that it come in early so that we have the maximum amount of opportunity to use that information for good. Third, that the definition of a covered cyber incident be broad and allow us the flexibility to further refine it. And fourth, that there be strong enforcement mechanisms to maximize the chance that this information is provided to the government and we can use it to protect everyone.
Yeah, and you said report quickly. What time frame do you think that should be? There's been some debate on Capitol Hill. The most recent bills say 72 hours, no earlier than that, to prevent false positives from being reported. Just your thoughts on that time frame.
Sure. So, I think the U.S. government has argued that we think 24 hours is the right amount of time. That brings it in early enough for us to use the information, but does give the company some time to determine whether this is a real incident or not. We would look at some of the major examples when there are these big incidents that are happening. 24 hours is long into the pretty deep into the response cycle already. In the Colonial example, they were already letting their customers know that they were shutting down parts of their pipeline well in advance of 24 hours. And so we do think that 24 hours is a good metric, recognizing that there's other opinions out there. We're continuing to work with the Hill. Ultimately, we think getting the information in is the most important thing. And so if we have to work on a timeline other than 24 hours, we will.
Okay. So we'll see if that bill moves this year. We're hearing potentially NDAA could be the vehicle forward. So also this summer, CISA launched a public-private partnership program known as the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC. Can you tell us more about that program and the intent behind it?
Sure. The JCDC was adapted from a concept that was recommended by the Cyberspace Solarium Commission when they released their report last year. Congress authorized it at the beginning of this year. The idea being that there is a planning function between the government and the private sector. The JCDC concept that we launched back in August really turbocharges that concept. It's not just planning, but it's more robust operational collaboration between the government and the private sector. And what we wanted to do was bring in those companies that have the broadest visibility into what is happening across the cyber ecosystem, the major internet service providers, the major cloud providers, the biggest cybersecurity vendors, the companies that deploy endpoint detection systems that are seeing things happening across hundreds or thousands of networks across the country and globally. the idea behind it is to take what those companies are seeing, take the ability that they have to take action at a very significant scale, and to marry it up with and harness the power of the federal government, those agencies that are working in the cybersecurity sphere, CISA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the intelligence community, bring all of that together so that as we are seeing new things, whether on the government side or the private sector side, as we're seeing incidents start to emerge, as we're seeing campaigns begin, we can harness the information we have together, and we can take action at a scale that no company or government agency can take individually. All of these companies and governments working together, we now have the ability to take action to protect the cyber ecosystem in a way that no one can do individually. And we're already seeing that pay dividends. It's early days. We launched it back in August. We are still working on some of the initial efforts focused on cloud incident response and ransomware. But we've already been using it to work. And as we see incidents, sharing it with our JCDC partners, they're doing the same with us. And collectively, we're able to take collective action much more quickly and much more broadly. And we think we're doing real value in protecting our networks today.
Can you share some of the names of the companies partnering? I understand Microsoft, Amazon, we have some big tech companies. And then are you guys looking for more industry groups and companies to partner with you still?
Sure. So I think we had a concept. We've got about 14 or 15 plank holder members. So some of the big cloud providers like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, some of the major internet service providers like AT&T and Verizon and Lumen, major cybersecurity firms like Mandiant and CrowdStrike, some of the big equipment manufacturers like Palo Alto and Broadcom and others. So there's a number of real, I think, critical partners in the IT world, in the cybersecurity sphere that are partners with us. It will grow over time. These are our kind of plank holder members, and we're proving the concept working with them. But we already have concepts for how we're going to move into the future, look at other areas, particularly in certain critical infrastructure sectors, whether that's in the energy space or in the financial services world, places we want to build out to better protect those critical functions that they're performing, and we will do so throughout 2022.
Yeah, and do you imagine a work product on cloud or ransomware to provide to the broader industry and other private companies that this group will be recommending? What are some of the near-term efforts we may be seeing from JCDC?
Sure. So in some cases, you're already seeing products that benefit from the collaboration between the government and the private sector through the JCDC. So yesterday, CISA, the FBI, and NSA released a product on black matter ransomware. And it includes information that was provided by our JCDC partners and information that was worked between the government and some of our JCDC partners. But we are going to be releasing additional products later this year, particularly on cloud, that will benefit from the engagement with the critical cloud players that are members of the JCDC, and that work will continue. And really think that this concept and the JCDC really adds tremendous value to the cybersecurity advice and recommendations that we've long provided, that we'll be able to enrich that with additional information that's only available to these private sector partners.
And you referred to yesterday's joint advisory from CISA, FBI, and NSA that identified black matter, which is reportedly located in Russia or linked to Russia as the actor that hacked several agriculture operators this summer. Can you walk us a little more behind the scenes on that effort that was advised yesterday? And do you expect, or are you guys planning to do more of these joint attributions and advisories in the coming months with FBI and NSA?
Absolutely. And we'll continue to do so. We released one several weeks ago on Conti ransomware. And I think that is really the value that CISA is trying to bring to the table. As we are seeing new ransomware operators, as we're seeing new malware variants out there, we will take that information, work it with our government and industry partners, and then get it out to the broader community, to all of our stakeholders in the public and private sector, whether in the federal government, state and local governments, or industry, so that they can use it to enhance their security of their own systems and networks. So you should expect more of that to come.
Right. And also this summer, Congress confirmed Jen Easterly to be CISA's director and Chris Inglis to be the country's first national cyber director. How are these two leaders working together so far? And how are they drawing the lines of distinction between their two jobs?
Sure. So, the relationship between the National Cyber Director and CISA is absolutely fantastic. And the president could not have picked a better inaugural National Cyber Director than Chris Inglis. And we are really pleased to have him as a really important partner to our agency. And I think he has spoken really eloquently about the role that the NCD performs, which is very focused on ensuring unity of effort in the federal government, making sure that the government's efforts are integrated and coherent. But that's substantially different than the work that CISA does, which, we're an operational agency. We've got more than a $2 billion budget, more than 2,000 employees, some across this country, and they're working every day looking to detect adversary activity hitting our networks, to develop products that can help shape behavior and provide information to our partners. We're building capacity across the country on security and resilience. So that's real operational work that our folks are doing every day, responding to incidents. And that's substantially different than the work that the National Cyber Director is doing at the strategic level. Both are important. They need to be closely linked up. And that's what we're doing. And the relationship between Jen and Chris is absolutely excellent. But we really don't see any competition. We really see this as a team effort. And, we've often called cybersecurity the ultimate in team sports. And I think that's embodied by the working relationship we have with the National Cyber Director and our other critical partners, whether it's the FBI and NSA, as represented by the releases that we did, as we just did yesterday, and the ongoing work that we're doing with those agencies every single day.
Right. And what actions do you recommend companies take today to become more cyber secure? What are your top tips from CISA?
So, I'll give you a couple of top tips for companies, and then I'll give you a couple of tips for individuals. In some cases, they're overlapping, and in some cases, they're a little bit unique. I'd say for a company, the most important thing to do is to take stock. What do you need to do to make sure that your company is cyber safe and secure? If you're the leader of your company, have you spoken to the people who are responsible for your IT and your IT security? Do you have a plan for what to do if you are impacted by a cybersecurity incident? Have you exercised that plan? Have you put in place the right level of technology, given that the risk that your company has faced? Are you using CISA's products to help you identify if you have put in place the right practices and you've avoided the bad practices? We've got a product called our Cyber Essentials that is really designed particularly for small and medium-sized businesses or small governments, but it's certainly useful even as you get into the larger companies, particularly to push to your supply chains. But it kind of walks through step by step the things that you should do to make sure that your company is safe and secure. Recommend folks search for Cyber Essentials on the CISA website, and it's a real valuable tool. For individuals, there are kind of four things that we continue to recommend, and we've still got another week or so in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we're trying to make sure that individuals out there are aware of the role that they play in the cyber ecosystem, the things that they need to do to protect themselves. So implementing multi-factor authentication on as many accounts as allow it. Current studies show that could protect as much as 99% of cyber incidents. Update your software, making sure that you have automatic updates turned on, really important. To be wise when you click on emails. Phishing is still a significant threat vector. A lot of adversaries continue to use phishing, and they're getting even more sophisticated. So really think before you click on links or attachments in emails. And finally, use strong passwords and use a password manager if possible, because those can really protect your systems, particularly protecting against attacks where an adversary compromises one password, then reuses it over and over because you've used the same password on too many accounts. So those kind of simple tips can help you protect yourself.
Right. And so we'll move to some audience questions now. We have one from John from Virginia, and he's asking, how can companies who are in the electric sector, the electric grid, which is obviously largely operated by the private sector, what can they do to become more cyber secure and mitigate potential threats to infiltrate or compromise the grid? Obviously, this isn't a hypothetical anymore. We had a massive cyber attack on Colonial Pipeline this summer, which led to massive lines at gas stations all along the East Coast. So, what specifically are you recommending for these energy companies? Obviously, there's ongoing efforts with TSA, which is all under the umbrella of DHS, where CISA sits, with cyber directives directing them to report. But what more is CISA doing with that energy sector?
Sure. So, the question asked about the grid, and I'll hit that, and then I can touch upon pipelines. The energy sector is one that we've spent a lot of time working on. And it's one where there is a tremendous amount of engagement, starting even at the heads. The CEOs of major electric power companies have been meeting for the last several years on cybersecurity issues and have really raised the game. And when it comes to the cybersecurity of the electric grid, on the one hand, these energy companies are a lot like any other companies. They operate business networks, and so they need to adopt the same type of network security that everyone else should be doing. But on top of that, they operate these operational networks that use industrial control systems to control the flow of power and regulate the systems and the generating units and other critical infrastructure on their networks. And those require kind of special handling. CISA operates an entire ICS security program. We work really closely with the Department of Energy on this. We put out a lot of information for companies that need to make sure that their ICS systems are protected. So oftentimes there's kind of a dual effort inside these companies, what they need to do to protect their business networks, and then what they need to do to provide even more security on those operational networks that can have a real impact on the power grid. I think what you saw from the security directive that TSA released that applied to critical pipelines is what they need to do to help secure their business network, and then additional levels of protection that we expect on operational technology systems, which can be complicated to operate, which have kind of unique cybersecurity challenges. So if you are operating in that space, reach out to CISA. There's things we can do to help. There's information we can provide, a lot of times in partnership with the Department of Energy and others, to make sure that you are protected.
Yeah, another audience question is from Dimitri, who points out that a lot of our world is connected by the Internet of Things, or IoT. So what can be done to make sure we're still more secure with IoT as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously a complicated one, because the proliferation of these devices that are now network enabled. And I think we have seen historically a number of years ago where someone weaponized the vulnerability in Internet of Things to create a very significant botnet that disrupted traffic on multiple parts of the internet. But I would say that you have to look at this from two angles. If you are a network operator and you're going to allow devices on your network, you need to think really hard about how you create a network that can protect itself if you're allowing these devices on where you are not securing those individual devices. This is really the thrust behind a lot of concepts like zero trust, what you can do to secure your network and make sure that anything that has access to your network, you understand you're regulating the privileges that those devices have to your systems. And if you can't trust that device, you need to lock it down so that it minimizes the amount of damage it can do. On the other hand, there's a lot of work that we're trying to do with vendors. There's work that I know Congress has looked at in terms of standards for IoT devices. That work is critical because we need to make sure that the devices that are coming in have some level of security built in. And so that is a long-term problem. There's not an easy silver bullet solution today. And really this falls upon network operators to make sure that even if these devices are brought in, that there is very little that they can do to actually harm the overall security of those networks.
Thank you. And then another question we have is from Charles in New York, who's asking, how can companies share data with the government to ensure more security in the supply chain, but also asking, what are some obstacles to sharing data with the government,
Sure.
in reverse?
I think that, we have tried to address as many obstacles as possible when it comes to information sharing, whether it's liability protection, which we received back in 2015, how we protect the information. That being said, when it comes to regulators, I would strongly encourage you to engage with the regulators themselves. They often have very specific information requirements that they are going to levy upon their regulated community, and those are going to vary from company to company and from regulator to regulator. I don't want to kind of get into the middle of that, and I think what every company should ask for is as much clarity as possible about the nature of the information that they need and the specific data elements that they want, so that they can provide it and avoid any concerns in terms of potential regulation and enforcement.
And another question from Paul in New York is, how is the digital transformation different in the government sector versus the private sector? How is CISA evolving? Even if you could talk to how you guys as an agency are operating remotely in pandemic, how are you trying to keep up with the private sector in terms of your digital transformation?
I would say in many respects, the government and the private sector are going through the same digital transformation. The pandemic obviously accelerated that significantly with the move towards much more aggressive remote work, a much larger remote workforce. I think that the government, I think the government's advantage is that for a long time, we've had fairly strong cybersecurity regulations about what we can do. We had the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, that provides some guidance. There's a lot of requirements that come down from CISA and from OMB on the operation of federal networks. A lot of those requirements don't exist in the private sector. And so there's going to be a lot more variation in terms of how the private sector goes about securing its systems. Now, there are going to be a lot of companies out there that are doing amazing job securing their networks using innovative practices as they've moved to a remote workforce. But what I would just recommend is that as companies are moving towards a growing remote workforce, think about the new vulnerabilities and weaknesses that may introduce into your system. How are you securing those remote devices? What kind of privileges do those devices have? How does this affect your ability to manage and secure your network? Is your security workforce remote, meaning that they're, with all of their elevated privileges, accessing your network, and how are they doing so, and what additional controls do you need to have in place to make sure that adversaries won't exploit it? And because we have seen for the length of this pandemic, extremely aggressive activity from both nation state and criminal actors looking to exploit the digital transformation, hiding in VPN traffic, using devices that don't have multi-factor authentication for privileged access. Time and time again, they're exploiting these digital transformations. So think long and hard about what you're doing and the tools and techniques and capabilities and systems you need to have in place to make sure that you're not exploited.
Yeah, and we're going to wrap up really quickly, but I wanted to see if there's any kind of last takeaway for companies in the private sector that if they had to do one thing to be more cyber secure, what would you recommend, or would you reiterate that you may have already said today?
Sure. So, there's no silver bullet in cyber. This is all about layers of protection. And so think about inside of your network, inside of your system, what do you need to do to enhance its security? It's not going to be one thing, although there are critical ones that I've mentioned, like multi-factor authentication and others. But just think through what you need to do. What are the layers of security you're going to put in place from both a technology perspective, a people perspective, a process perspective? Cybersecurity is a problem-solving discipline. It's about thinking through what are the weak points, what do I need to do to secure myself, and how do I make the adversary's job harder so they skip on and they go on to the next guy. And so that's the advice I'll leave you with, and I think it's sound ones for everyone listening.